My name is Ranger Nathan Cole, and I have served with the National Park Service for nearly 12 years, the last 7 of them stationed in Olympic National Park on Washington's western edge. The park is vast, close to 1 million acres of wilderness that stretch from rugged coastline to glacier-fed peaks. Most people only see a fraction of the moss-draped trails near the driftwood-strewn beaches or the mirror-like calm of Crescent Lake. But my post lies deeper inland, in the less trodden northern sections where the rainforest gives way to old-growth fir and the canopy swallows the sun. Our outpost, Station 12, sits about 20 miles off Highway 101, accessible only by a service road that becomes nearly impassable each winter. There are 3 cabins, mine another for visiting biologists, and a supply shack with a satellite antenna that flickers between reception and static depending on the weather. The station isn't glamorous, but it's functional: a bunk, a radio, and enough rations to last through the week. I've worked in some lonely places before, but this one carries a kind of silence that settles under your skin. When you first arrive, that silence feels pure, an invitation to listen. You hear the slow drip from the canopy, the tremor of wind across wet cedar bark, the wingbeat of ravens before dawn. Over time, though, you start to realize the silence isn't empty. It's watchful. My duties are routine: check trail markers, log wildlife activity, monitor erosion, and respond to any distress calls from hikers or researchers in the area. We also keep track of incident reports, which range from minor injuries to something stranger: sightings of unregistered camps, fires where none should be, or animals behaving erratically. Most of it turns out to be human error. Every now and then, it isn't. On the week it began, the park had been under an unusual fog advisory. That wasn't uncommon in itself. Fog here can roll in so thick you can't see the tips of your boots. But this one had lingered longer than any I could remember. 3 days without a clear break in visibility, even at higher elevations. The moisture clung to the trees like a film, muting sound and flattening the air. Early Monday morning, I received a message over the radio from Ranger Judith Alvarez, who managed patrols near the Elwha River Basin. Her tone was clipped and professional, but I could tell she was uneasy. "Cole, you noticed the trail counters?" she asked. We'd installed small pressure sensors at several trailheads to log foot traffic, simple devices that help track visitor activity. "Yeah, why?" I said. "They're picking up movements overnight," she said. "Between 2 and 4 a.m., no sign-ins, no cars parked nearby. Thought it might be elk at first, but the spacing's too consistent." "How consistent?" "2 sets, alternating about 5 seconds apart. Pattern repeats every night." I jotted it down in the logbook. There were dozens of reasons for false readings: humidity, sensor malfunction, even falling branches. But something in her tone made me take note. "Could be hikers camping off-trail," I suggested. "That's what I figured. I'll head out tomorrow with Davis to check the area." She signed off, and the radio crackled back into static. I didn't think much more about it until the following evening. Around dusk, I was hiking the Northern Ridge Loop to replace a damaged sign when I found a set of footprints cutting across the mud near a drainage ditch. They weren't fresh, but they were odd. Deep heel marks. Toes barely visible, as if the person had been stepping backward. At first, I thought I'd simply misread them. The rain distorts impressions easily, and the soil there is soft still. The more I studied them, the stranger they looked. Each print was evenly spaced, like someone walking with deliberate care. Heel first, then rolling onto the sole. They led from the tree line out toward the trail, then abruptly stopped near the drainage culvert. No sign of where they began, no other tracks nearby. I snapped a few photos for the log, mostly to amuse myself. In the Park Service, you learn not to get too excited about weird tracks. Half the time it's a trick of erosion or lighting. Still, I couldn't shake the unease of how cleanly those impressions ended, as though the person had vanished mid-step. That night, I stayed up late at the cabin finishing reports. The generator hummed softly outside, and the fog pressed against the windows like breath. Around midnight, I stepped outside to stretch my legs. The air was damp enough that the beam of my flashlight looked solid, a pale column dissolving a few feet ahead. From the tree line came a faint sound, something between a shuffle and a drag. I froze, angling the light toward it, but saw nothing except drifting mist. A few seconds later, the sound came again, closer this time. A steady rhythm, step, step, pause. "Judith," I called out. No answer. The steps halted. I waited, counting breaths. Then, slowly, the sound reversed direction, receding with the same measured pace until it faded into the forest. I told myself it was probably an elk or a stray deer disoriented in the fog, but the rhythm had been too clean, too human. The next morning, I contacted Judith again to follow up. No response. Her station usually checked in by 0800, but by noon, both she and her partner, Davis, were overdue. I radioed headquarters at Port Angeles, who confirmed they hadn't from her either. By late afternoon, I was instructed to begin a field check toward the Elwha Basin and locate her team. I packed for 2 days, standard survival kit, first aid, radio, flare gun, and enough provisions for 72 hours in case weather turned bad. The fog hadn't lifted. The trail leading west was eerily still. Even the usual noise of thrushes and woodpeckers had gone quiet. At one point, I noticed how my own footsteps seemed dampened, like sound couldn't travel more than a few yards before dissolving. About 5 miles in, I reached a section known as Cedar Hollow, where the trail splits toward the river. The path there is narrow, bordered by massive nurse logs and moss thick enough to swallow a boot print. That's where I found their vehicle, a Ranger-issued SUV parked halfway off the service road, lights dead, doors closed. No sign of struggle. Inside, the radio handset was missing, but the logbook sat open on the passenger seat. The last entry read once in 17 hours. Visual contact figures on trail. No response to verbal call. Approaching for ID. The rest of the line trailed off mid-sentence. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I grabbed my radio and reported the find, but reception was spotty. Only fragments of my message seemed to transmit. I debated turning back, but regulations required visual confirmation before declaring a search escalation. I marked the vehicle's GPS and proceeded on foot. The trail beyond the road curved downhill toward the river, dense with ferns and mist. About half a mile in, I noticed another set of prints, this time fresher, pressed deep into the wet soil. 2 sets, alternating, the heel marks again, only now they overlapped with Judah's standard issue trade pattern. I followed them for about 20 yards before realizing something unsettling. The paired prints weren't leading away. They were coming toward me, but heel first, just like before. At some point, the forest quiet turned oppressive. Even my breathing sounded muffled, like I was underwater. The prints ended near a fallen log. Beyond that, nothing but unbroken moss. When I crouched to inspect them, a faint scent hit me, earth and iron, almost metallic. I looked up, expecting to see movement in the trees, but there was nothing except gray vapor curling through the branches. That's when my radio hissed. At first, it was just static. Then, through the noise, a voice. Nathan. Judith's voice. Faint but distinct. I pressed transmit. "Judith, where are you? Do you copy?" No reply. Just the same hiss, then a click, like someone had switched channels. I cycled through frequencies. On channel 6, another whisper came through, overlapping itself. "They're behind you." I spun around. The forest was empty. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Every instinct told me to run, but training forced me to stay still, observe, confirm. I raised my flashlight again. The beam cut across the fog and caught something pale against the ground. A scrap of fabric tangled in the underbrush. When I knelt to retrieve it, I realized it was part of a ranger uniform sleepover. The edge was frayed, darkened by moisture. Stitched above the cuff was the faint outline of Alvarez. The air around me felt colder. The fog seemed to pulse, drawing closer like breath. That's when I heard the first echo of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heel first, moving somewhere ahead but out of sight. I switched off my flashlight. The noise stopped instantly. For a long minute, I stood there in darkness, breathing shallowly, waiting for another sound. None came. Only the deep hum of the forest and the drip of condensation from the leaves. Eventually, I backed away, marking the location with orange tape before retracing my steps toward the service road. Each time I paused, I thought I heard something shift behind me. The faint crunch of moss, a rhythm too careful to be wind. By the time I reached the vehicle again, daylight had thinned into gray. My radio flickered in and out, catching fragments of HQ chatter I couldn't fully decipher. I tried to log my findings, but the transmitter light died mid-report. That night, I made camp inside the SUV with the doors locked. Outside, the fog pressed against the windshield like frosted glass. At one point, I swore I saw silhouettes move through it, figures gliding backward, their forms dissolving before they reached the tree line. I didn't sleep. By dawn, the fog had thickened into something almost physical. My compass needle spun in slow circles, and the forest smelled of wet stone and rust. Somewhere beyond the haze, faint voices echoed soft, rhythmic, like two people speaking in sync. I couldn't make out the words, but they were coming closer. By the time I stepped out of the SUV, the morning light had turned to dull silver wash through the fog. Everything was damp. The air, the earth, even my breath felt heavy. My boots sank into mud that gave off a faint metallic odor, stronger now than last night. I wanted to believe it was just mineral runoff from the river, but something about it felt wrong. I tried the radio again. Static. No HQ, no response on any frequency. Even the distress beacon on the dash flickered erratically before fading out. I stood there with the handset pressed to my ear, waiting for a signal that never came. Protocol said to return to base if communication failed, but I couldn't leave Judith and Davis out here, not without confirmation. Their SUV was still right in front of me, silent, like it had been parked just moments ago. And those footprints I'd followed last night, they'd been fresh. So I went back into the trees. I marked my path with tape every 30 yards. The fog made orientation useless. Even my GPS kept losing lock, showing me drifting miles from where I stood. I tried to keep my bearings by following the river's sound, a low, steady rush somewhere to the west. After maybe an hour, the forest began to change. The trees grew thinner, spaced too evenly, and the moss on the trunks turned dark, almost black in the dim light. The smell of iron was stronger here, mixing with something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. I came upon a small clearing where the soil looked disturbed, gouged out in irregular patches. At first, I thought it was animal activity, maybe elk hooves or bear claws. But the indentations were too wide, too flat, like someone had used their hands to dig. There were scraps of fabric mixed into the dirt, bits of canvas, a torn strap from a ranger pack, one corner of a laminated field map. I knelt and brushed the soil away carefully. Underneath, the ground was spongy, almost warm. When I pressed my glove into it, the impression filled instantly with water. Except it wasn't water, it was darker, viscous. I pulled back quickly, heart hammering. The fog pressed closer as if reacting to movement. Somewhere ahead I heard that sound again, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heel first. I aimed my flashlight toward it. The beam cut through the mist and landed on the outline of a figure about 30 yards away, half hidden among the trees. For a moment I thought it was Davis. Same height, same uniform color, but the posture was wrong. Shoulders too high, head tilted at an odd angle. "Davis!" I called out. "It's Cole. Where's Judith?" The figure didn't answer. It took a step backward, heel first, then another. I stepped forward, raising the light. "Hey, stop right there!" It kept retreating, smooth and soundless now, like sliding on ice. Then it turned, not with its body, but as if its head pivoted full around. I saw a pale face, eyes clouded gray, mouth slightly open as if trying to form words. I froze. My finger tightened on the radio trigger even though it was dead. The thing held still for a long second, then tilted its head again, backward this time, until it was looking up at the canopy. Then it vanished into the fog, leaving no trace of movement. When I reached the spot where it had stood, there were footprints in the mud. The same kind, deep heel impressions, no toes. But this time, each print was filled with that same dark liquid seeping up from below. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed higher ground, somewhere to get a visual. About half a mile west, the ridge rose sharply, and I made my way up, slipping on wet roots and stones. The higher I climbed, the thicker the fog became, which didn't make sense. It should have thinned with elevation. When I finally reached the crest, the view below was just a shifting white void. No sign of the forest floor, no river, nothing. But I could hear them. Voices, faint and layered, echoing through the fog like conversation heard underwater. I picked out a few words, names, numbers, something that might have been, "Help! Judith!" I shouted. The voices stopped instantly. Silence swallowed everything. Then came the reply, not from below, but from behind me. "Nathan." It was Judith's voice. I turned. She stood maybe 10 feet away, her uniform soaked, her hair plastered to her face. Her expression was blank, eyes unfocused. For a second, relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. "Jesus, Judith, where's Davis? Are you hurt?" She blinked slowly. "We found them." Her voice sounded off, toneless, like she was repeating a phrase she'd practiced. "Found who?" I asked. Her gaze flicked past me, toward the trees. "They walk backward here." I didn't understand at first. "What?" She took a step closer, then stopped, her face tightening as though she were listening to something only she could hear. "We followed them," she whispered. "They showed us where the sound comes from." "Judith, you're not making sense. We need to get back to the vehicle." "They don't like when you speak forward," she said softly. "You have to face away. That's how they see you." Something about the way she said it chilled me. I reached out, meaning to steady her, but she flinched back violently. Her lips moved again, but the words came out backward, literally reversed syllables, garbled and wet. "Judith." She opened her mouth wider, and I saw that her tongue wasn't moving. The sound wasn't coming from her throat at all. It was coming from the fog behind her. I stepped back, flashlight shaking in my hand. "We're leaving. Now." Her eyes snapped up to mine. For a moment she looked almost lucid, terrified. She mouthed something silently, "Behind you." Then she collapsed. I dropped to my knees, checking for a pulse. Her skin was cold, damp like river stone. No heartbeat. But even as I pressed my fingers to her neck, I heard something faint. A slow rhythm beneath the surface, not quite a pulse, not mechanical either. More like movement. The fog around us shifted. I looked up and saw shapes emerging, vague outlines of figures, dozens of them, moving in unison. They all stepped backward in perfect rhythm, faces turned away. I grabbed Judith under the arms and dragged her toward the ridge path. My boots slipped in the mud, heart slamming. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of synchronized steps followed, soft, wet, and steady. By the time I reached the lower trail, my lungs burned. I laid Judith against a fallen log and fumbled for the emergency beacon. The light blinked once, then died again. I tried CPR, nothing. Then, halfway through the second cycle, her eyes snapped open. But they weren't her eyes anymore. The irises had turned the same gray as the fog. She inhaled sharply, and the sound that came out was backward speech, like a tape rewinding. I stumbled back, tripping over my pack. She sat up slowly, tilting her head in that same unnatural angle the figure had earlier. Her mouth moved, and I realized she was trying to mimic breathing. "Nathan," she said, voice low and distorted. "Don't face them." Her neck jerked once, twice, then her body went limp again. The forest fell silent. I left her there. I shouldn't have, but I did. I marked the spot on my map and ran east until the ground leveled out. The fog thinned slightly near the riverbank, enough for me to orient myself. I stayed there until nightfall, crouched under a rock shelf trying not to move. Every so often I'd hear footsteps somewhere nearby, always the same measured pace, retreating and returning. Once, I heard my own name whispered in what sounded like my voice. When darkness came, the forest began to glow faintly. Not light exactly, more like reflections that didn't belong. Shapes flickered between the trees, mirroring my movements half a beat late. I forced myself to breathe slow, to think. The only thing that made sense was to get to higher ground again, find the old fire tower north of the ridge. It had a built-in transmitter. If I could reach it, maybe I could bypass the damaged channels. The climb took all night. The fog followed, thick and soundless, as though it were alive. At one point, I lost the trail entirely and ended up wading through knee-deep water that smelled of rust and decay. By dawn, I saw the tower's outline through the mist. Tall, skeletal, rising above the treetops. Relief hit so suddenly I nearly laughed. I climbed the metal steps 2 at a time, Each rung groaned under my weight, echoing into the fog. At the top, the cabin was empty but intact. Dust coated everything, and the old radio console sat in the corner like an altar. I powered it on. The red light flickered weakly, then steadied. "Station 12 to Port Angeles HQ," I said, voice hoarse. "This is Ranger Nathan Cole. Possible fatality. Ranger Alvarez. Request immediate extraction. Static." Then, faintly, a reply. "Repeat, Cole, not authorized. Say again, HQ. I can barely read you." "Cole, you were reported missing 4 days ago." My mouth went dry. "Negative. I've been out less than 48 hours. I'm at Fire Tower 7, Northern Ridge." The line crackled again. Tower 7 was decommissioned in 1998. I stared at the console, heart pounding. "I'm looking at it right now." Then another voice cut in. Not HQ, not any Ranger frequency I knew. Low, rhythmic, almost mechanical. "Nathan," it said. "Turn around." I did. Through the cabin window, the fog had risen to the level of the platform. Shapes were gathering just beyond the glass, figures stepping backward in perfect sync. Their faces were turned away, but their reflections in the window looked straight at me. One of them wore Judith's uniform. The first tap came against the glass, then another. Not sharp enough to crack it, just a slow, rhythmic knock that matched the beat of my heart. I backed away from the window, one hand still gripping the radio. The figures outside didn't move closer, but the fog behind them seemed to breathe. I counted 8 shapes, maybe more. Each stood facing away from me, backs rigid, their movements mirror smooth. Every few seconds they'd shift, one step backward in unison, then stop again. "Nathan," a voice rasped from the console. "They're waiting for you." I yanked the power cord out. The cabin fell into silence except for the faint wind sighing through the tower's metal ribs. I could smell ozone, wet air charged with static, and something else beneath it, faintly metallic. I drew my sidearm, loaded with tranquilizer rounds meant for wildlife, not people. It was all I had. The knock on the glass stopped. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the hatch below me groaned. Someone, or something, was on the stairs. Each step creaked under deliberate weight, heel first. I braced the door with the radio table, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Judith." I called, though I knew it wasn't her. No answer. Just that slow, scraping climb. When the handle turned, I fired. The dart clanged off metal and hissed harmlessly into fog. The sound broke the stillness like a gunshot. For a moment the stairwell went quiet again. Then came a dozen footsteps, all moving at once. Up the stairs, around the outer railing, circling the tower in perfect rhythm. I slammed the hatch shut and shoved the locking pin into place. The tower shook under the weight of movement outside. Through the windows, figures drifted through fog, circling counterclockwise, never facing me. The radio table rattled. My flashlight flickered. Every piece of metal hummed faintly, vibrating like a tuning fork. I crouched low, hands over my ears, as a high-pitched tone filled the room. Thin, piercing, just at the edge of hearing. Then, suddenly, silence. I risked a look through the window. The platform was empty. The fog hung motionless. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I tried to steady myself, to think. I needed to get off the tower. Find open ground, maybe reach the highway. Staying here meant becoming a signal for whatever this was. I packed fast, flashlight, flares, extra radio batteries, and climbed down the emergency ladder on the opposite side. The rungs were slick with condensation. Halfway down, I paused, listening. Nothing but the faint groan of metal. When my boots hit the ground, I felt the earth pulse underfoot, a low vibration like something massive shifting deep below. The fog had thickened again, wrapping every tree in pale gauze. I turned my compass east and started walking. For the first mile, I saw no sign of pursuit. The forest was quiet in a way that felt hollow, as if every sound had been absorbed. Then, ahead, through the gray, a faint red glow. At first, I thought it might be campfire embers, maybe a search team. But as I drew closer, the light came from above, hanging mirror like a lantern. It pulsed in a slow rhythm. 2 blinks, pause, 2 blinks. The same pattern Judith's trail sensors had recorded. I ducked behind a fallen log and watched. The glow hovered among the trees, drifting lower until it skimmed the ground. When it touched the soil, the light spread outward in thin veins, tracing the outlines of footprints. Hundreds of them, each heel first, forming a spiral around the center. In the middle of that spiral stood a single figure, still as stone. Facing away, I crouched lower, heart hammering. The figure raised one arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed directly toward me. Without turning, that broke whatever courage I had left. I bolted east, branches clawing at my face, lungs burning. The forest blurred into streaks of gray and green. Behind me, the rhythm of footsteps began again, not matching mine but mirroring them, each one half a beat late, like an echo trying to catch up. I didn't stop until the ground opened into a ravine, its bottom hidden under mist. The old suspension bridge that crossed it was still there, a narrow plank walkway rope between two leaning pines. Half the boards were missing. I hesitated only a second before stepping on. The wood groaned, ropes creaking. Below, the fog churned like water. I made it halfway across when the first vibration hit. The bridge trembled. Something heavy had stepped onto it behind me. I turned just enough to see shapes forming in the mist at the entrance. Figures moving backward onto the bridge, one after another. Their heads tilted up as if scenting the air. "Keep going," I muttered to myself, gripping the rope rails so hard my knuckles split. Each step ahead was a gamble. The planks bowed under my weight. A board cracked behind me. The sound wasn't wood, it was bone. I broke into a run. 2 more steps and I was at the far end. I jumped the last gap and hit the ground hard, rolling into wet moss. Behind me, the bridge began to sway violently, ropes snapping one by one. I scrambled up just as the entire span gave way, collapsing into the ravine with a hollow roar. The sound echoed upward, then was answered by dozens of voices from the fog below, all speaking backward at once. The chorus rose and fell like wind, then cut off abruptly. I kept moving until my legs gave out. The forest opened onto a clearing I didn't recognize. In its center stood an old ranger cabin, half collapsed and swallowed by vines. I forced the door open. It fell off its hinges with a sigh of rot. Inside, dust motes drifted in the thin light from a cracked window. On the wall hung a faded photo of a ranger team from decades ago. I stepped closer. My stomach turned cold. Judith was in it. So was Davis. And me. The photo was dated 1997. I stumbled back, breathing hard. My flashlight beam jittered across the walls, catching something carved into the wood beside the door. "If you face them, you stay." The words were etched deep, the grooves dark with age. I felt movement behind me, a shuffle of feet. I spun around, gun raised. Nothing. Just my own reflection in a warped mirror leaning against the far wall. Except the reflection didn't move when I did. It stood facing me, then took one step backward. The air turned cold. Frost crept along the glass, outlining a handprint from the other side. I turned away, heart racing, and caught a glimpse through the broken window. Outside, the fog was shifting again, forming tall columns that pulsed faintly with red light. The same spiral pattern, the same rhythm. I couldn't stay here. I forced the back door open and stepped into a narrow corridor of trees that sloped downward. The ground squelched underfoot. Somewhere below, water gurgled, maybe the river. If I could reach it, I could follow it downstream toward the highway. The path curved sharply and ended at a pool of black water. In its center floated something pale. I crouched, squinting. It was the sleeve I'd found before, Judith's, but now the rest of her arm was still inside it. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. The water rippled outward, and a reflection rose to meet me. Not mine this time, but hers, eyes open, mouth forming silent words. Then the surface broke and a hand shot up, gripping my wrist. I screamed and yanked free, stumbling onto the bank. The hand sank again without a ripple, leaving only the smell of rust and earth. That was enough. I ran. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned. I kept running until the trees thinned and the fog broke open to reveal the faint shimmer of asphalt ahead, an old service road. The signpost at the junction read Mile 27, closed for maintenance. Civilization. Maybe. I collapsed against the guardrail, chest heaving. The fog didn't cross the road. It stopped like a wall at the tree line. I stared at it, waiting for movement. None came. For the first time in 2 days, I heard actual birdsong. A thin, distant chirp. It felt unreal, I sat there until nightfall, trying to make sense of the timeline, the photo, the missing rangers, any of it. Nothing fit. My watch still showed the right date, but my radio clock had reset to 0800. When darkness came, headlights appeared down the road, two beams cutting through the mist. I staggered up, waving my arms. The truck slowed, engine idling. A man in ranger uniform stepped out, face shadowed by his cap. "You Nathan Cole?" he asked. "Yeah, Station 12. I called in for extraction." He frowned. "Station 12 has been unmanned for years." Before I could answer, he looked past me toward the tree line. His expression shifted. "You came from in there?" "Yes." He took a step back. "Then you turn around, son. And don't stop walking until you can't smell the trees." Behind me, the forest began to whisper. The ranger didn't speak again. He just nodded toward the truck, keeping one hand on the door as if he might bolt at any second. I climbed into the passenger seat, my whole body trembling. The heater blasted stale air that smelled faintly of oil and pine cleaner. He put the truck in gear and pulled away from the tree line. Neither of us looked back. The forest shrank behind us, swallowed by fog. For the first mile, the only sound was the rattle of gravel under the tires. Then, quietly, he said, "How long were you out there?" 2 days, I said. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Maybe 3. He didn't answer right away. "You sure about that?" I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the road. "They found your truck a week ago. Empty. Radio smashed. No footprints leaving the area." A chill crept up my spine. "That's impossible." He shrugged, jaw tightening. "You're not the first." The wipers screeched across the windshield, clearing a film of mist that seemed to creep from the outside in. I caught a glimpse of his name tag. M. Keen. I didn't know him. "How far to Port Angeles?" I asked. "Or maybe less," he said. "HQ wants you checked out by medical, then debriefed. After that," he hesitated. "They'll decide what happens next." What's that supposed to mean? He didn't answer. The fog outside thinned slightly as we descended, revealing the outlines of familiar signs, mile markers, a rusted maintenance shed I recognized from a previous patrol. For the first time in days, my heartbeat slowed. The radio crackled faintly on the dash, and Keen reached to adjust the frequency static. Then, faintly, "Tower 7. Return. Tower 7. He flicked it off. "Interference," he said. But the voice had sounded like mine. We didn't speak again until we reached the ranger substation near the park's southern boundary. It was little more than a concrete bunker tucked into the hillside, fluorescent lights humming overhead. He parked out front and handed me a blanket. "You'll need to check in with Dr. Lennox," he said. "She's on night shift." I got out slowly, legs unsteady. The night air felt thicker here, heavier. The forest loomed behind us, silent and patient. Inside, the station smelled of disinfectant and old paper. A woman in her 50s, gray hair tied back in a knot, looked up from her desk. "Ranger Cole?" I nodded. She gestured toward a chair. "Sit. You look like hell." "Thanks," I muttered. She examined me methodically. Blood pressure, pupils, reflexes. Her hands were steady, practiced. "You're dehydrated, sleep-deprived, and running on adrenaline," she said. "That's the short version." I wanted to tell her everything, the fog, the figures, Judith, but the words wouldn't come out right. Every time I tried to explain, my memory folded in on itself. It was like describing a dream that kept rewriting itself mid-sentence. Finally, I managed, "There's something in the forest." She looked up sharply. "Something? Not an animal?" I said. "Not people either. They move backward, they copy us." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked briefly toward Keen, who lingered near the door. "We'll make sure you get rest," she said softly. "Someone from HQ will debrief you in the morning." They led me to a small bunk room. Cinder block walls, single cot, no windows. The hum of fluorescent light overhead was constant, unbroken. I lay down but couldn't sleep. Every time I blinked, I saw gray eyes in the fog. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps in the corridor, slow, deliberate. Heel first, I sat up, holding my breath. The steps stopped outside my door. Then came a soft knock, 3 taps, evenly spaced. "Keen," I called. No answer. The handle turned, then stopped halfway, as if whoever was outside had changed their mind. I crossed the room quietly and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. When I looked down, a shadow stretched under the door. Faint, diffuse. It didn't move with the light, though. It pulsed as if breathing. I stepped back slowly. The air smelled faintly of rust again. A low whisper filtered through the crack. "Return to Tower 7. I backed against the wall, heart hammering. The whisper came again, slightly louder. Then, suddenly, the light overhead flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on. The beam landed on the far corner and caught the outline of muddy boot prints across the floor, heel first, leading from the door to the cot. My cot! I spun, light trembling in my hand. No one there. The door creaked open slowly. The hall beyond was dark except for a faint red glow pulsing somewhere down the corridor. I stepped into it, flashlight raised. The glow came from the radio room, the old console flickering to life on its own. The signal light blinked twice, paused, blinked twice again. The same rhythm I'd seen in the forest. Static hissed, then resolved into a voice. My own voice, Nathan Cole reporting from Tower 7. Visual contact with the unidentified figures. Approaching for ID. It was the same transmission Judith had logged before she disappeared. I turned off the radio, but the voice kept going, echoing from the intercom speaker on the wall. The words repeated, looping slightly wrong each time, syllables reversing, stretching. I backed toward the exit. Keen appeared at the end of the corridor, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Cole, someone's in here," I said. "They're using the system." He glanced past me at the radio room, then frowned. "That equipment's not connected. Power's been cut for years." He stepped inside and ran a hand over the console. Cold. No lights. No sound. But I'd heard it. I still heard it faintly under the hum of the fluorescence. "Get some rest," Keen said quietly. "You're still in the woods whether you know it or not." I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, the fog had reached the station. It rolled through the tree line and pooled in the lot like spilled smoke. The higher-ups arrived by noon, a small team from HQ wearing crisp uniforms and the same expressionless calm I'd seen at debriefings before. They asked questions, took notes, never looked me directly in the eye. I told them about Judith, the footprints, the tower, everything. They wrote it all down, nodding at intervals, but I could tell they'd already decided what box to check. When I mentioned the photo in the old cabin, one of them paused mid-sentence. "Photo?" "It showed me," I said. "And Alvarez, and Davis. From 1997, the man exchanged a look with the woman beside him. Tower 7 was shut down in 98, he said. That team was reassigned. You weren't even in service then. I'm telling you, I saw it." He closed his notebook. "Understood. We'll arrange a full psychological evaluation once you're cleared medically. For now, rest. You're safe. Safe." The word rang hollow. They left before evening, their SUV disappearing into the fog that still hadn't lifted. I stood by the window watching the tree line. The forest was only 50 yards away, but it felt miles deep. Something moved between the trunks, a flicker of pale gray, then stillness. When I turned away, Keen was standing behind me. I hadn't heard him enter. "You ever wonder why they don't send cleanup crews into the north section anymore?" he asked. I frowned. "What?" He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Because every time they do, the count comes up short. Always by one." He handed me an envelope, plain, sealed, unmarked. "HQ asked me to give you this." I opened it. Inside was a photograph, the same one from the cabin. Only this time, the faces were clearer. Judith, Davis, a third figure between them. Me, except the version of me in the photo wasn't facing the camera. I looked up, but Keen was already gone. That night, I dreamed of the forest breathing, fog moving in and out like lungs, trees bowing with each inhale. In the dream, I stood at the edge of the ravine, the broken bridge swaying in wind that didn't exist. Across the gap, a figure waited, back turned, head tilted. When I woke, the blanket smelled faintly of cedar and wet soil. My boots by the door were damp, though I hadn't worn them since the rescue. Outside, the fog had finally begun to lift. but under the first thin sunlight, I saw them, footprints leading away from my door, heel first. By morning, the prints outside the door had half filled with rain. I took pictures, measured the spacing, logged everything by procedure, trying to hold on to that small act of order. The rational part of my brain still insisted there had to be an explanation: distorted runoff patterns, some trick of the soil. At 8:30, the phone on the wall rang. I hadn't heard it ring once since I'd arrived. A clipped voice answered. "Cole, this is HU Command. You're scheduled for transfer to Port Angeles this afternoon. You'll report directly to Director Hensley for review. Transport leaves at 1300 hours. Copy that," I said. "I's Keen coming." Pause. "Who?" "Ranger Keen. He was the one who picked me up last night." Another pause, longer. "There's no Ranger Keen assigned to that sector." The line clicked dead. For a long time I just stood there, the receiver against my ear, listening to the hollow dial tone. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. I packed my gear anyway. Procedure again. Habit, anchor. When I stepped outside, the fog had burned off the immediate clearing, but clung to the tree line like a retreating tide. The forest waited, still and pale. The transport arrived right on time, a white van with Park Service markings and 2 men inside. They wore the same crisp uniforms as the HQ team from yesterday, but their name tags were blank. "Ranger Cole," the driver said. "That's me." He gestured to the back. "Hop in." The ride started quiet. We drove south along the service road, through stretches of forest that looked too familiar. Every turn, every bend, felt like somewhere I'd already been. The driver kept his eyes on the asphalt. The other man beside him never turned around. I tried to make conversation. "Has anyone found Alvarez yet?" Neither answered. After 10 minutes, I noticed the odometer wasn't moving. The needle held steady at 0, even as the landscape rolled by. "Your gauge is busted," I said. The driver didn't respond. That's when I looked out the window more carefully. The trees weren't changing. The same warped cedar with the lightning scar, the same boulder split like a jaw. They repeated every few hundred feet like a loop. "Stop the van," I said. No reaction. "Stop the goddamn van." The driver's hands didn't move from the wheel. His knuckles were white. Then I saw his reflection in the side mirror. Eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. No pupils. I reached for the door handle and jumped. The impact knocked the breath out of me, but I rolled and got to my feet. The van kept driving silent, tires whispering on gravel until it disappeared into mist that hadn't been there a second earlier. I stood alone on the road, knees bleeding, the air dead still. The forest pressed close again, darker this time. Something brushed the back of my neck, cold, damp air, or maybe a hand. I turned fast, gun raised. Nothing. Just the faint echo of footsteps fading backward down the road. I walked toward where the van had vanished, each step heavier than the last. The fog closed in, swallowing the edges of the world. When I glanced behind me, the road was gone. It should have terrified me. Instead, a strange calm took over, like my body had accepted something my mind couldn't yet name. I kept walking until I saw a light ahead. Fluorescent, steady, artificial. A building emerged through the mist. The Port Angeles Ranger headquarters, exactly where I'd been headed. Inside, everything looked normal. Desks, filing cabinets, the smell of coffee and printer ink. A receptionist at the front desk looked up, smiled mechanically. "Ranger Cole," she said. "Director Hensley is expecting you." She gestured toward the hallway on the left. I followed it, counting each step. The hum of the overhead lights sounded too smooth, too constant, no variation, like a recording. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. A voice came from inside, low, precise, confident. "Compartmentalize the report. No external release until verification." I knocked once. "Come in," Hensley said. He looked exactly like his personnel photo, tall, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He smiled in that practiced way bureaucrats do when they think empathy can be faked. "Ranger Cole, good to see you alive. Sit down." I sat. The chair was cold metal. He leafed through a file on the desk. "Your statement mentions a loss of radio contact, disorientation, visual phenomena, and what you described as mirror entities. Is that accurate?" "That's what I saw." Fog density at the time. Zero visibility beyond 20 yards. He nodded, jotting something. And you say you recovered the body of Ranger Alvarez? I did. He looked up slowly. That's interesting. Because Alvarez checked in with us yesterday evening. I blinked. That's not possible. She was treated for exposure, mild shock, but she's stable. He slid a photo across the desk. Judith sitting in a hospital bed, blanket over her lap, smiling weakly. She doesn't remember much, Hensley said. Just fog, distorted sound, and finding you unconscious near Tower 7. That's wrong, I said. She died in my arms. His expression didn't change. Trauma affects memory. We've seen it before. Ranger Davis was never located, but we'll keep searching. I leaned forward. You think this is some kind of breakdown? He folded his hands. I think the forest plays tricks on perception, especially under prolonged isolation. We've lost rangers to that before. I stared at him. What about the footprints, the transmissions, the tower that supposedly doesn't exist? He adjusted his glasses. We decommissioned Tower 727 years ago. You were standing in a different structure. One of the old fire lookouts repurposed for data collection. Misidentification happens. He spoke in smooth, measured tones, but his pen was shaking slightly against the folder. Sir, I said quietly, I know what I saw. Hensley closed the file. Take a few days off Cole. Go home. When you're ready, we'll assign you light duty near the visitor center. No field work until psych clears you. That was the official dismissal. But when I stood, he didn't move. He just watched me expression neutral until I reached the door. As I stepped out, he said softly, Don't look back, son. I froze. He was staring past me, out the window behind his desk. The reflection in the glass showed his back, facing away. I left without another word. Outside, the receptionist was gone. The lobby was empty. The clock on the wall ticked backward. I walked out into sunlight that felt too bright, too white. The air smelled of salt and rust. Port Angela's harbor lay below, glittering. For the first time, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I'd finally crossed whatever boundary the forest had drawn. I found a motel near the waterfront, showered, slept 12 hours straight. When I woke, the sky was still the same color as when I'd closed my eyes. Time hadn't moved. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 100. The television turned itself on. Static hissed for a few seconds. Then an image formed, grainy, gray. A forest canopy seen from above. A voice, faint and reversed, murmured through the speaker. I leaned closer. The words straightened mid-sentence, clear now. Ranger Cole. Report to Tower 7. I unplugged the TV. The screen stayed on. Outside the window, fog was rolling in from the harbor, thick and fast. The parking lot disappeared first. Then the streetlights. Within minutes, the world beyond the glass was nothing but shifting white. I stepped back. The reflection in the window didn't move with me. It just stared, eyes pale gray, then took one slow step backward. The power went out. The darkness wasn't complete, though. A faint red pulse lit the edges of the curtains. Blink, blink, pause, blink, blink. My radio, still in my pack, came alive on its own. Tower 7, visual contact, approaching for ID, Judith's voice. Then mine, then silence. I stood there, hands shaking, trying to find any thread of reason left. Maybe this was what Hensley meant about perception breaking down. Maybe none of it had ever been real. But when I looked down, the carpet was damp. Muddy heel prints led from the door to where I stood. The air inside the motel had thickened until every breath felt borrowed. The red pulse under the curtain blinked faster now, heartbeat rhythm. My hand was on the door before I even decided to move. Instinct outran thought. Get out. In the hallway, the fog had already seeped inside, sliding along the carpet like low smoke. The EXI'd sign at the far end flickered, its letters shimmering backward in the haze, as if the word itself wanted to lead me the wrong way. I kept one hand on the wall and moved fast. The air was colder here, slick against my skin. Somewhere above, a radio whispered static that shaped itself into broken words. Don't face them. The stairwell smelled of iron. I bolted down 2 flights and burst into the lobby. The clerk behind the desk sat motionless, head bowed. A soft clicking came from his throat. Sir, I said. He looked up. His eyes were gray. He smiled, wide and wrong, and began walking backward through the fog toward the service door. I ran. Outside, the harbor was gone. Only outlines of buildings floated in the white, dissolving as I passed them. Every direction looked the same. I tried following the cry of gulls, anything living, but even those calls came delayed, a half beat late. My truck still waited where I'd left it, beads of dew on the windshield. When I opened the door, the smell hit me, wet earth, moss, cedar. The forest. I hesitated, then climbed in and started the engine. The headlights cut narrow tunnels through the fog, revealing nothing beyond 20 feet. I drove by muscle memory, every nerve screaming to keep moving. At the first intersection, the traffic light blinked red twice, pause, red twice again. My stomach dropped. No, I whispered. The road inland, back toward the park, was the only one left. The opposite lane, the way out, was gone, erased in white. I turned toward the woods. The asphalt gave way to gravel, then to damp dirt. The fog brightened from within, glowing like backlit smoke. Trees rose where houses should have been, their trunks black with moisture, their branches dripping. I killed the engine. Silence pressed close, patient. The forest had grown over the town. When I stepped out, the ground sucked at my boots. Behind me, the truck's headlights flickered once and died. I took the flashlight and a single emergency flare. The air smelled of rust and old rain. Somewhere ahead, a radio crackled. Tower 7, visual contact approaching for ID. I followed the sound. What else was there to do? The forest shifted as I walked, subtle but constant. Trees leaned closer when I wasn't looking. Paths straightened behind me. My sense of distance stretched thin. Then, through the fog light, a red beacon flashed above a metal silhouette. The tower, still standing, or standing again. The clearing below it was empty. My earlier footprints, if these were the same woods, had filled with dark water. The fog pulsed with each blink of the beacon. I climbed. Each rung hummed faintly under my palms. Halfway up, the metal warmed, vibrating like it had a pulse. At the top, the cabin door opened. Inside, the radio glowed red. A voice whispered through static. Nathan Cole reporting from Tower 7. I see them. My own voice. Condensation blurred the windows. I wiped one clean and froze below. Dozens of figures moved through the clearing, all stepping backward in widening circles. Their precision was unnatural, military, mirrored, perfect. At the center of the spiral stood a taller shape, gray and faceless, arms too long. It raised one hand, palm outward. The radio hissed. Nathan, my voice said. Return. I gripped the transmitter. What are you? Silence. Reflection. The figures stopped. The tall one tilted its head, matching my movement exactly. I stepped left, it stepped left. The delay vanished. I turned to grab my pack and caught a second flashlight beam slicing through the fog. Someone was climbing the ladder. Cole, Judith's voice. I froze. She pulled herself onto the platform. Drenched and pale, breath ragged. You have to come down, she said. They're everywhere. I saw you die. I know. She reached for my arm. Please, Nathan, don't look at them. How do I know you're real? Because I'm still facing you. Behind her, the fog thickened into human outlines. Her body flickered, doubled, then steadied. They won't let you leave, she whispered. They need someone to replace the signal. What signal? Her eyes darted to the radio. It's not sending. It's receiving. The tall shape below began to move. The circle of figures collapsed inward, their backward steps quickening. Judith gripped my shoulder. Turn it off. I slammed the switch. The light stayed on. The signal tone climbed higher, sharper, until the glass cracked. Nathan Cole reporting. I ripped the cable free. Sparks leapt. The beacon overhead flared blinding red. The fog screamed. Pressure filled the cabin, a vibration that made my teeth ache. Judith fell, hands over her ears. Below, the figures writhed, folding into themselves, collapsing like reflections in shattered water. The tall one didn't fall. It straightened, turning its head a full half circle to look up. My face stared back. Judith shouted, but the roar swallowed her words. I tore the flare from my belt, struck it, and hurled it down. The clearing burst with red smoke. For a moment the thing recoiled, arms raised. Then the ground split. Black water boiling up through soil. The tower shuddered. Bolts screamed. "Jump!" Judith yelled. We jumped. Air tore past, ground rushing up. I hit hard, rolled through wet ferns, pain flashing across my ribs. Behind us, the tower collapsed with a metallic shriek, swallowed by the fog. I forced myself upright. Judith was gone. Only her flashlight lay in the mud, beam aimed toward an opening in the trees. I followed. The gap led to a stretch of cracked asphalt, the same service road as before, marked by a leaning sign, Mile 27 closed for maintenance. I limped forward, lungs burning. The forest hissed, leaves trembling without wind. Something massive moved in the fog behind me, branches snapping like bones. I didn't look back at the sign. The air changed. The fog thinned, lighter now, the scent of salt creeping in from nowhere. I stepped through it and felt gravity return. The world hardened underfoot. I kept walking until my knees buckled on asphalt. Somewhere far off, an engine droned. Maybe a helicopter, maybe highway traffic. The first honest sound in forever. I lay there, staring up at the pale sky. For a heartbeat, I believed I'd made it. Then I saw my reflection in the chrome bumper of an abandoned Ranger Jeep beside the road. It was facing the other way. I shut my eyes, forced my breath steady. 1, 2. When I opened them, the fog was gone. The trees stood ordinary and still, as if nothing had happened. Then the Jeep's radio clicked on by itself. "Nathan Cole," a voice said softly. "Welcome back." The voice from the Jeep's radio was soft, almost gentle. "Welcome back." For a moment I just stood there, windless air pressing against my ears. The radio speaker crackled again, low static like shallow breathing. Then silence. I leaned through the open window. The keys were still in the ignition, a tag dangling from the ring, Station 12. "Cole." "My name?" "My handwriting." I pulled the keys free and stepped back. The sound of the tag clinking against the metal rang longer than it should have, as if the air itself wanted to keep the note. The forest looked ordinary again. Sunlight cut through mist, catching dust motes in slow spirals. The asphalt under my boots was warm. A breeze stirred the grass at the shoulder of the road. It all felt real. I told myself, "You made it out." Breathe, call, "Hey Q." The Jeep's radio light blinked red twice, paused, then twice again. I dropped the keys. That same pulse, the same rhythm, the same rule I never understood. I backed away until my calves hit the guardrail. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cried once, sharp enough to shatter the quiet. The echo came back wrong, later, lower. I started walking. Not toward the park, not anywhere in particular, just moving. Asphalt gave way to gravel, then to dirt, the world narrowing with each step. When I reached a crossroads, I saw a sign I didn't remember. OLYMPI Sinatoanalpel Parkire Anj2 Malas. A familiar green, familiar font. Maybe real, maybe not. I followed it. Every few minutes, as I checked my shadow, it stayed behind me, mostly. Once it didn't. I stopped looking after that. The checkpoint appeared near dusk. A small gatehouse, chain link fence, the smell of diesel and wet leaves. A light glowed inside. I almost laughed from relief. I called out, "Ranger Cole, Station 12, requesting entry." A shape moved behind the glass. The door opened, and a man stepped out, middle-aged, uniform crisp, expression patient. "You're a long way from your sector," he said. "Long story," I said. "I's HQ in contact." He smiled faintly. "We've been expecting you." That sentence hit me sideways. "I need to report an incident," I said. "Possible fatalities, Rangers Alvarez and Davis. Also something else. There's contamination in the northern sector." He nodded as if I'd said something perfectly ordinary. "Of course. Step inside. We'll take care of it." Inside smelled of pine, disinfectant, and metal filings. The radio on the counter murmured static, rhythmic as breathing. "Sit," he said. I sat. He poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one toward me. Steam coiled, the scent almost normal. "What day do you think it is, Ranger?" "Friday," I said. "Maybe Saturday." He checked a clipboard. That wasn't what broke me. What broke me was the calm in his voice, like he'd known the answer before asking. He studied me for a moment, then said, "You remember the rule, don't you?" "What rule?" His eyes flicked toward the fog pressing against the window. "You never face them." The radio crackled louder. He didn't move, didn't blink, just said quietly, They're listening. I stood so fast the chair toppled. Who are you? He smiled again, and for a heartbeat the smile didn't line up with his face. It lagged like a projection catching up. I ran. Outside, the air had turned dense again, fog spilling over the fence like smoke from a ruptured tank. My pulse hammered as I sprinted toward the road. Behind me, the radio voice followed mine. Layered over itself, Nathan Cole reporting from Tower 7. The gatehouse light went out. I kept running until the trees swallowed everything. Somewhere ahead, water rushed the river. If I could reach the Elwha, follow it down to the coast, maybe I'd find real people again. Real light. The path bent left, then right. I knew these turns. My own footprints ghosted beneath the new ones. Heel first impressions shining faintly with moisture. I slowed.
No.
I whispered.
No.
The river was there, yes, but the tower was too. Hole again, standing in the clearing beside it, red beacon flashing like a heartbeat. I turned around. The road was gone. Only forest. The radio on my belt clicked alive. Ranger Cole, visual contact confirmed. My own voice. I threw it into the dirt. The light on it blinked once, twice, then steadied. The fog thickened into columns. They began to move. Not fast. Just steady. Heel first. I ran for the tower because there was nowhere else to go. The stairs were slick with moss, but I climbed anyway. The same hum in the metal, the same pulse under the skin of the world. Inside, the radio was waiting. The red light glowed like an eye. Welcome back, it said again. The fog pressed against the windows. Faces formed in it. Judith, Davis, Keen, Hensley, each one pale. Expressionless, staring not at me but through me. Their mouths opened in unison, releasing a sound like reversed breathing. Reflection, they whispered. The floor vibrated. I grabbed the table to stay upright. The radio repeated my own breathing half a beat late. I shouted, if you can hear me, if anyone can hear me, this isn't real. The reply came in perfect unison from the fog. Then why are you still here? Glass shattered. Cold air rushed in, thick and metallic. The figures stepped onto the platform, backward, one by one, surrounding me in a slow ring. My pulse sinks to the beacon overhead. I backed against the console. What do you want? They spoke together. We want to go forward. And I understood, finally. The forest wasn't alive, it was stuck. Every echo, every reflection. Every backward step was a world trying to correct itself. And I was part of the correction. Judith's voice rose above the rest. You brought them out. You opened the door. The fog coiled tighter. If I stayed, I'd become one of them. If I ran, I'd drag the loop somewhere new. There was only one way left to break it. I reached for the flare gun on the shelf, loaded one round, aimed at the console. Nathan, the fog said. Don't, going forward, I whispered. I fired. The flare hit the radio and the cabin burst into red fire. The beacon exploded overhead, raining sparks. The figures dissolved into smoke, their outlines tearing apart in reverse motion, unmaking themselves. Heat swallowed me. For a second I saw the forest split open beneath the tower, a vast mirror shattering outwards, swallowing light and fog and sky. Then everything went white. When color returned, I was lying on damp soil under a gray dawn. The tower was gone. The forest was quiet, alive again with birds and wind. A helicopter circled overhead. A voice through a loudspeaker shouted my name. I raised one arm. They found me an hour later, delirious, half-burned, dehydrated. At the hospital, they said I'd been missing for 11 days. The official report listed isolation, trauma, exposure, hallucination. They showed me photos of the site. No tower, no clearing, just untouched trees. I didn't argue. Weeks passed. I healed. They offered counseling, desk duty, early retirement. I took none of it. I moved inland, far from the coast. But sometimes, when the evening fog rolls down from the hills, my reflection in the window lags by half a breath. And if I listen closely enough, I still hear a faint pulse under the hum of the world. 2 blinks. Pause. 2 blinks. Sometimes I answer back, because maybe it isn't calling me back. Maybe it's asking me to lead it forward.